Hello. Uh, yes, so welcome everyone to our side event, the last one of the day. So thank you for sticking around. Our topic is non-party stakeholder partnerships and the GST, global cooperation through AI and other approaches. Now, before we start with our panelists present, I believe we must address the elephant in the room. As you may have noticed, what we have here is what's called a manual discussion, which is it's a 100% male speaker panel, which is our initial aim was to have 2 male and 3 female speakers. So we actually had 2 to 3 women of color from diverse professional backgrounds scheduled to be on our panel, and there was another prospective panelist who was in our network who was figuring out her schedule. And while we have been denied their expertise and their presence, we can learn a lot from their absence. So one of them was a prolific researcher from Nigeria, Oshi, as you can see there. Oh, well, on the flyer. She was working with the Center for Environmental Peacebuilding, with the Africa Center for Development and Research, and a new initiative in Nigeria to empower women and girls to engage in climate action. Another panelist whom we were prepared to have with us on stage was a young leader from the Middle East who has been engaged in the global sustainability movement for a few years already and was a UN Young SDG ambassador. And we also had a party delegate from Ghana from our network who was trying to fit our panel discussion in her busy schedule. All 3 of these panelists have been denied or delayed their visas. Some of you may have noticed there were protests on this issue in the lobby these past couple of days. So last year, 32 invited delegates, including party delegates, were reported to have been denied visas, and multiple others were delayed their visas because of which they could not participate in meeting sessions and panels they were supposed to. It is reprehensible that delegates, almost all from the Global South, are being silenced this way. And we shall be submitting formal statements of protest through our constituency focal points and seeing how else we can highlight this issue. In the past, for one of our projects, when we were working here, we wanted to bring some of our beneficiaries, 3 ultra-poor women farmers, to participate. And we started the visa process 4 months before the event, and we still could not get through. So it is a recurring issue. I'll give a very brief introduction to the topic before our panelists take over. So the GST, as well as other components of the UNFCCC process, are integral to measure and enhance progress on the Paris climate goals. Non-party stakeholders are notable in their absence from these processes and from the UNFCCC process and system at large. Now, these stakeholders include community-based organizations, they include NGOs, social entrepreneurs, political entities, including but not limited to political parties, and other auxiliary actors who act as enablers for these other ecosystem players. Now, while the observer system was put into place relatively recently, it has little real impact on the actual proceedings. Even more importantly, observers don't have a voice, and their participation is not incorporated in global and national planning and policies. So whenever non-party stakeholders are mentioned in general, a very limited definition of the term is used. The observer system is only accessible to actors with a particular set of circumstances and particular sources of funding and a free hand in terms of resources and bandwidth. As mentioned in the case of the missing visas, the Global South is particularly handicapped in this respect, and stakeholders, non-party stakeholders even more so. There is no funding available to observers and other non-party stakeholders to participate. And given that of the 6 COPs held between Paris and Glasgow, 5 took place in Europe, that places a considerable strain on resources. Being absent from the global institutional response to climate change also means that they have limited avenues to collaborate, to network, and most importantly, to transfer their expertise and their technologies and their experiences. So I shall be sharing some personal experiences in that regard later on as well. And we will be discussing some new approaches, most notably artificial intelligence and how it may help fill some of these gaps. Now, our first panelist, Cedric, he wears 3 hats, being from an academic background, and he then moved into politics. And since then, he's been a part of multiple global efforts for sustainability and ecological transition. Our next panelist, Robin, he wears 2 hats as well. So he's an emerging entrepreneur in fintech and climate financing, and he's also an industry leader through other initiatives with apex bodies. And meanwhile, I shall be sharing my perspective as an engineer and a social entrepreneur and a policy expert. So what I'm saying is what we lack in number of panelists, we more than make up for with the number of hats on the panel. So yes, so without further ado, we'll also be joined by another panelist through a pre-recorded video, Mauricio. Mauricio is an engineer with 20 years of experience in multi-criteria territorial planning and mechanisms for environmental conservation design and implementation of GIS and remote sensors to orient planning processes and include the themes of indigenous farmers and institutional organizations in different parts of Colombia. He's the director of projects for the Chendukua Foundation, an NGO based in Colombia, and in 2020 it received a special mention for Human Rights Award from the French government in regards to their work with the indigenous people of Sierra Nevada and the Santa Marta. The video is 4 minutes long. It's in Spanish, but we've got subtitles, and later on Cedric will be sharing, adding some context to the significance of Mauricio's work and the challenges he faces. So here we go.
Buenos días a todos y todos. A lo largo de la historia, las comunidades indígenas han contribuido.
Sorry.
Buenos días a todos y todos. A lo largo de la historia, las comunidades indígenas han contribuido y fomentado la importancia de los saberes ancestrales y su relación con el mundo natural que les rodea. En el pensamiento indígena, el planeta es un ser vivo, la madre naturaleza, que siente y le duelen los daños que se le causan. Es así como en diferentes escenarios las comunidades indígenas han emitido alertas sobre los peligros de sobrepasar los límites de la resistencia a la madre tierra por las acciones del ser humano. El llamado general de las comunidades indígenas ha sido el diálogo, la confianza, la paz, la buena amistad y el hábitat en los territorios. Es así como la recuperación y regeneración de los territorios degradados, la protección de ecosistemas críticos por efecto del cambio climático se pueden convertir en un elemento sustancial que permitan el cambio en la visión y formas de entender los territorios y las relaciones humanas sobre los espacios naturales que nos proveen de los recursos vitales para la sociedad indígena y no indígena. En los últimos 25 años, la Fundación Chendukua y Cielao, asociación de origen francés y miembro de la ICN, ha desarrollado trabajos en Sudamérica y principalmente en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta de Colombia. Ha escuchado el llamado de los mamos, las autoridades tradicionales y espirituales y sus saberes ancestrales para la recuperación ambiental, cultural, social y de espacios de gran importancia ecológica para el planeta y la construcción de paz en un mundo que requiere de esfuerzos adicionales. Miles de indígenas han sido beneficiados por la recuperación del territorio, la conservación ambiental y cultural de los espacios sagrados en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta de Colombia, lo que ha contribuido a mejorar las relaciones sociales con los territorios, la construcción de paz y la preservación de los conocimientos y saberes ancestrales. Es necesario realizar acciones de recuperación y transmisión de conocimiento aplicados a los saberes tradicionales para que permanezcan en el tiempo y en diferentes lugares, que la humanidad pueda tener una alternativa de resolución de conflictos y de problemas como el cambio climático. adaptando otros conocimientos y enfoques de forma holística para interpretar y generar acciones que permitan reducir los impactos ambientales que perjudican el bienestar de la madre tierra. Articular los conocimientos milenarios de los pueblos indígenas con los conocimientos de la educación clásica es un desafío que vale la pena tomar. Es una nueva forma de construir nuevos enfoques, nuevas alternativas y nuevos modelos de análisis y, por supuesto, nuevas formas de relación entre la sociedad y los territorios con base en la existencia de modelos de conocimiento que de manera respetuosa puedan permitir y generar un diálogo como un fundamento elemental para la paz del mundo y una mirada con un futuro de esperanza. Es importante considerar que la solución del problema de cambio climático desborda las acciones y los conocimientos que en la actualidad se están desarrollando. Es posible entonces intentar un nuevo enfoque en los abordajes de los escenarios de cambio climático a partir del respeto, confianza y desarrollo de nuevas tesis construidas en conjunto y desde diferentes perspectivas de manera holística. Esto quizás nos lleva a un mundo y a un encuentro de oportunidades diferentes. Las herramientas tecnológicas, con ayuda de la inteligencia artificial, pueden permitir avanzar en la predicción y prevención de efectos naturales, utilizando, por ejemplo, datos de gestión de datos, análisis y modelado territorial. El desafío y la invitación es a construir un tejido colaborativo apoyado en la gestión de datos y basado en el respeto que demuestre que con la integración de toda la sociedad indígena y no indígena es posible construir un mundo en paz, con equidad y esperanza.
Okay. Friends, you just heard Mauricio Montana from Colombia. I met Mauricio during a transcultural dialogue in which a group of scientists like me, mathematician by training, were visiting the Kogi people in the Colombian Sierra, in their territory and traditional housing. Our visit was not for anthropology, neither for direct help. It was to establish respectful cultural dialogue and helpful connections. There were a lot of logistic problems to solve, but it was precious and hugely appreciated by both parties. Mauricio is working on behalf of the Fondation Chendukwa with the Kogi, Arhuaco, and Wiwa peoples. And they organize a trip and more generally support the indigenous people from the Sierra. Coming from Europe, diving in the ecological conflicts of Colombia is incredibly impressive. You find all the themes you are used to just super magnified. You have giant coal mines, which on top of being climate nightmares prevent access to some of the Kogi's most sacred sites. Recovery of the historical land by the indigenous people for agriculture requires big money and huge legal support, both inaccessible to them without international help. Huge dams have been destroying land and biodiversity. And assassination by paramilitary groups is a serious possibility. Actually, Mauricio at some point was put on the target list and had no choice to save his life than change his city of residence within 24 hours. And his predecessor actually got assassinated. Such heroic efforts are precious because supporting these people is the right cause. These are courageous people and threaten culture, but also for the power of inspiration which they can bring. Their skill in observing and preserving the wildlife, their extraordinary sense of the connection between beings, their skills for sustainable farming which are clearly visible on the ground. It's an example on which human rights and more precisely protection of minorities goes hand in hand with climate protection and more generally ecological issues. And it's a recurrent theme in this conference. It's also one example of many projects which on top of direct help need technical support, political awareness, and international connections. These things are immaterial but hugely important, and are some of the reasons why Shrey and I, among others, started our initiative. Green Spider, focusing on the fundamental immaterial web which we need to spin around the world to overcome separation and isolation of projects. Before I go on, let me talk about my own trajectory, a lot of which was devoted to build connections. By the way, I'm new here at UNFCCC, learning how it works, convinced that a crucially important work is being done here, but also convinced that this kind of events needs more people with my type of background, either on the scientific side or on the political side, to gain some effectiveness that it is still lacking currently. So about me, I was trained as a scientist, did a research career in mathematical physics, very international and collaborative, was lucky enough to receive a number of international awards for my works in kinetic theory of gas and plasmas. Here's a sample on the screen of my favorite scientific heroes, equations, achievements, ceremony. Here receiving the Fields Medal. By tradition, the award is handed by the head of the state welcoming the International Congress of Mathematicians. In this case, President Patil from India. From then, I was very active at the interface of science and policy or politics. I was director of an international research institute based in Paris. I was very active in conveying scientific culture. I sat on the scientific board of European Commission, among others. Then I entered French Parliament. I chaired the Scientific Parliamentary Office and as such supervised national hearings and reports on subjects as diverse as nuclear energy, vaccines, plastic pollution, genetic editing, biodiversity collapse, and of course climate change. I was in charge of devising the French national strategy in artificial intelligence. Here's my report. I was in charge of the national strategy of mathematical education, etc., etc. Initially entering this, I had this idea that when politicians do get the right sound evidence from science in front of them, then they are ready to take right decisions, depending on the evidence and on what they believe. Then I discovered the rich and crazy life of politics from the inside. What is national campaign, how decisions are made within parliament or government, and how I had to revise my naive ideas. Then I became more and more active in causes dear to my heart, loosely or strongly related to science, human rights, animal rights, ecology in general, life and land preservation. I was campaigning to demand more effective law, publicly lecturing about some of the important treatises in political ecology, demonstrating about land depletion, etc. It's often said that when you age, you become softer. For me, it was the contrary. The more I touched the obstacles against society transform, the more I became kind of vocal and kind of radical. At the same time, realizing how technique is only a minor part of political decision. Looking back to it and my experience, I can identify a few of my recommendations and inputs through reports being currently in use on some policies, but it's very clear that to help things move in the right direction, I needed to draw lessons from my political experience, and these are lessons that I believe is good for experts. Some of them. Lesson one, usually when you're in politics, you have no time to get to know a subject. Pressure is everywhere. Your schedule is so packed that it seems like a joke at first. There are always campaigns and plots inside the plots that keep you awake at night. So there's no time to study in depth unless you make a specific effort towards it. Here, a lot of this conference is about GST. We know GST is important for the future of the world. I've heard it again and again on these past few days. I bet you there are at most 2 of my former colleagues from Parliament out of 900 something who know what GST is about. Not heard about it and not time to get aware about it. And they're not here to hear about it. Recently, by the way, one of our ministers for environment was so lost with the concept of loss and damage that in front of a group of journalists, she kept calling it repeatedly loss and profit, just to give you the scale. Lesson 2, when you have to take a tough decision and you're a politician, under pressure it is the heart which prevails rather than the head. And politicians may be perfectly informed, have all the evidence on their desk. Eventually, when it's time to vote or take difficult decisions, they will refuse the jump, finding all kinds of excuses unless they are convinced beforehand with their heart and know that they are ready to face their electors and face companies, etc., and ready to face their anger. So it's more about courage than information. Lesson 3, obstacles to action are everywhere in political action. There are powerful local or national or international interests who do not want green agendas to be put in place. Think that IPCC budget is less than 10 million per year in the whole, and it's been estimated that the total budget put on the table by adversaries of the change in North America to prevent change to occur is close to 1 billion per year. Not the same scale. And there's resistance by the society, resistance by administration, cultural resistance, inefficiency, whatever. I like to call it the viscosity, physical concept of viscosity, which in a fluid is very good to annihilate the motion that you try to put. It's only with extremely resolute action that you can hope to overcome this resistance. One disillusioned advisor to a former Minister of Environment in France said in a book, even if Greta Thunberg was our Minister of Environment, it would not change much in our greening efforts given the strong resistance to change. He was thinking in particular of resistance by administration and by society. And lesson 5, it might be tempting in view of all these difficulties to do without the politicians and work with the NGOs and with the experts and so on. But eventually we do need the politicians. Otherwise budgets are not voted, incentives not framed, public messages not heard. So we have to do with this all. And transition needs good plan and experts for sure. We have this from the good work of IPCC, UNFCCC, or bodies, etc. But it also needs 3 ingredients which are much less expert, which need politics, and which currently have much more obstacles. One is the will to really do it, and not just promise and promise and promise indefinitely. One is the human resources to handle all the jobs and tasks which it requires all across the society. And one is the finance. And we've seen in previous panels that for finance to be at the right level for green efforts, it needs to be multiplied by something like 10 within a generation. So for this, it's not enough to have science and expertise with you. You also need to convince and wage a cultural battle. Now, here's a key take. When it comes to ecology, the threat is global, obstacles are global, but action is harmed by local barriers set either by administration, and visa issue is one of these many obstacles, or by culture, or by lack of knowledge and trust. So our goal at Green Spider is to catalyze efforts by overcoming these barriers, working out international connections and connections between these spheres, providing advice and contacts and tools. Here are some examples and use cases. I told you about Mauricio Montañas and his friends from the Sierra. Among threats they threat is pollution, even forcing the authorities to recognize that they do have a pollution threat currently going on is a challenge. There is no independent expertise that they can rely on, and they would need for that a network of independent experts who can help them analyze pollution without vested interest. For sure, there are some people in universities nearby who do have the connection able to do that, but how can they identify them? It's very small cost, high reward, but requires to identify the right people. Another typical use case, you're working your NGO in a subject, starting it, you don't know that there's another NGO working in some country that you never heard of. Did achieve some subject, some success using this and that recipe. Traveling here and there in many contexts and countries, I've encountered a number of such examples, from decarbonation plans to vegan activism that would take either inspiration or tips, help from knowing such activities. Or it may be you're looking for an editor to translate and promote your book, which is significant for green transition but did not receive attention away from your country. Or somebody who's ready to compare and confront the green strategy from this country and that from that region and say, okay, there's a mismatch here or there's an incompatibility, or you can improve both by doing this. And this you need to do with connections and tools. Or you need to identify, much in advance of a political debate, some potential political ally in a party otherwise busy within a politics. And without that political ally, your plan, as good as it may be, will have no impact. Let me take a moment finally for a specific tool which we will be exploiting and which has been familiar to me for years now through policy, actually, which I'm now contacted every day of my life, either by media or by a party or by whatever, which is artificial intelligence. Recently, it has led to the most crazy frenzy ever in economic circles, with billions pouring in. Application of AI to environment issues was one of the axes of my 2018 report to the government. At French and European level, so far the impact was disappointing, partly for cultural issues, partly because, after all, environment issues eventually are about physics and chemistry and biology much more than information. On the other hand, AI is very good about information, identifying patterns, analyzing documents, and creating them. And this leads to various promising paths in view of the recent developments. One is about improving the assessment of specific situations and impact of actions. And here, let's take the analogy with medicine, one of the sectors in which AI has been working best, from diagnosis to therapy design. I've been working out a working group with the Academy of Medicine in France about these issues, but also there are congress and conferences all around the world about these type of things. That is because medicine relies on a huge number of factors, hard to predict even for experts, also depends on information which is transferred to medical doctors, not just the scientific knowledge, but also the knowledge that people on the ground will get. It's estimated that no more than half of the known science is exploited in practice in medicine. Likewise, ecology rests on an extraordinary number of factors, some of them hard to predict, including paradoxical rebound effects from society or from ecosystems, including economic patterns, including sociology, etc. Systematic analysis by AI tools may give precise information of ingredients which make it work in some use cases or not, and transform information from one territory to another. Then, of course, AI can be used in a number of ways for the connections between people and projects. For matching people and projects, for translating, identifying, helping to devise whatever, grant applications, debunk fame from the cultural war, analyze documents, and so on. And currently, obstacles to green transition are much more on the political and economic side than on the scientific and technological side. But political and economic world do thrive on words and sentences. Any tool which is gifted for analyzing and processing sentences can be used to make things move forward. And that is our ambition.
Thank you, Cedric. We really dove into all three of your worlds, and I hope we get to hear some more detailed analysis from you further on. Now, next we have Robin Clemens. Robin is the co-founder and CEO of Kumo, and he has been working on the intersection of blockchain and climate since 2019. Kumo is the only 100% nature-backed stablecoin that makes climate action effortless. In his previous position as chair of the Hyperledger Climate Action and Accounting SIG, he led an international group of 500 plus individuals building blockchain-based accounting solutions. So yeah, here you go, Robin.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm glad to be here. As mentioned, I start from my first position at Hyperledger. Hyperledger belongs to the Linux Foundation, and Linux is the largest open source community of software development. So it's a non-for-profit organization, and thousands, maybe millions of people coming together, contributing to code, and no one is being paid by the Linux Foundation developing code, but it's our people like me that are either intrinsically motivated or are being funded by their corporation. But organizing these many people is what makes collaboration unique. And we have many tools that work, and with processes that work, and which enabled us at Hyperledger to focus on climate accounting solutions, because climate accounting is crucial for us in order to know what are our actions about. Are they good or are they bad? What do we need to do more and what do we need to do less? And when we have some numbers and some information, we can then use climate finance, which is what we'll talk later about, to finance innovation, to fill the gap, to drive people, to attract more people transitioning from maybe jobs in the fossil fuel industry to project developers that do reforestation projects. So at Hyperledger, what we have done and are still doing is building a multi-stakeholder network of people, of diverse backgrounds coming together, governments, NGO, individuals, startups, to just share their experience and knowledge and have a look at different emergent technologies like AI, blockchain technology, RT sensory, and more. And trying to come up with guidance so people can just use these open source standards and apply it for their work. But not only providing standards, also providing good practice examples, not best practices, what we don't know yet, to see how this can be applied, to see how a pilot could work, to prove that it's possible to improve existing systems, and then to scale this out. As an example, from a supply chain pilot that we've done. Supply chain is scope 3 of greenhouse gas accounting, and it's very, very difficult. It's many different stages, many different suppliers, many different countries, and many possibilities to either not properly transfer data or manipulate data, or just to fake it completely. And what we've done there is using IoT sensory combined with blockchain technology to give identities to machines. And so machines now are being able to sign data, and we are able to trace back the information throughout the supply chain. So we've built an integrity layer. And AI is a topic for today. I've done some AI before, and what most people don't know, AI or data science is 90% about just improving data sets, getting the data ready so you can train your model. And what we use, like ChatGPT or other AI systems, that's just the application, but they need to be trained. And they're only as good as the data that we feed them to learn from. And if we feed them with wrong data, we cannot really use AI to improve something, because AI cannot generate something net new. It can only combine what's there and help us fill the gaps or see something that's very hard for us to see because it's so many data points. But it's never net new. And that's what we've done with Hyperledger. So we want to empower mainly corporations to be better, more efficient on their scope 3 accounting and non-financial reporting in general. So they know, like, okay, we need to do these actions more in order to reduce our carbon footprint or water usage, many more things. But still, at some point, they will end up at a non-avoidable carbon footprint because most industries cannot reduce to zero. And then what are instruments that we need to do then, use then? And that's what I'm currently working on. It's the voluntary carbon market. It's an impact market for driving finance to climate-positive projects that either reduce carbon emissions from the atmosphere or avoid their emissions. And these markets have mainly two issues. I mean, we need to scale them, and we need to have as much demand as possible, because more demand means more money flowing into these markets, more forestry projects being built, more cookstoves being developed, or with direct air capturing, more carbon is just soaked out of the atmosphere. But the issue these project developers are facing is access to finance. How do you scale this? It's like the process of developing a forestry project is usually for project developers needing upfront capital of $1 or $2 million US. And the time from starting a project until you receive the credits issued from one of the standard bodies like Verra or Gold Standard takes 3 years or 5 years, meaning there's a financing gap. You need upfront money, and then there's nothing coming in. And then there's money coming in at some point. But it's a volatile market, so you don't know exactly how much you'll receive in a couple of years. And what we try to provide them with is collateralized loans, meaning we say, well, if the carbon market is not at the desired price for you at the time of issuance, because that's what no one knows, we still want you to get access to financing without the need of forcing you to sell your credits at a loss, because we want you to be able to scale. We want you to be efficient. Basically, we want to revise the capitalistic system and say, well, let's use markets, let's drive efficiency into the natural assets markets and then provide different financing options for project developers so they can choose whatever fits best for them. And now the point of demand, and that's the thing about this 100% nature-backed currency or stablecoin. That's something that I've experienced firsthand. I live on a vegan diet. I try not to fly, but sometimes I need to because I cannot get to the COP27 in Egypt without taking a plane. I don't have a week to travel. And there's so much more that I could do, but to be honest, and Cedric also mentioned it, our schedule is already so full, and we don't have, or could have, but we decide to not do 100% only climate action because we have other things in our life that are important to us. So I was asking a question, what can we provide for everyone that it's just effortless, that we can integrate in our daily lives without spending more money for sustainable clothing or taking the extra time, effort, changing our behavior? And it comes back to finance. Money is very central. It's too central in our thinking. But money cannot or can be more than just money that we think of. Money in our case is a store of value. It's a means of account. And we use it to transfer money in between or value. But it can be more. Money can also mean impact. The way money is constructed these days is it's maintained by central banks like the European Bank or the Fed in the United States. It's a debt-based system. We don't need to go into details, but it stops there. And before 1971, the US dollar was still backed by gold. And when the US government introduced basically this gold-backed currency, people started digging for gold because there was utility for gold. Before you could use it like for your teeth or maybe you just put it in a vault and have it there as a store of value. And what we are doing is saying, well, yes, let's use a concept that has been worked before, but let's not use gold, let's use natural assets. And what are natural assets? It's certified carbon avoidance or carbon removals, it's renewable energy certificates. And let's use these financial assets as a backing or a security for a new currency. And that's what we do. We want to provide a currency that means every US dollar we use is backed by $1 worth of carbon credit or renewable energy certificate. And just by using it, or the more we use, the more demand we create and the more capacity from the market we drive into the system and create a sort of digital vault, digital carbon sink, and we can just end up with using like a green version of PayPal. By using it, it's still for free, it's still easy to use, but just by switching to it, maybe at the end of the year, through all your transactions, you will have contributed to removing 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. And for you as the end user, it was just for free. That's the money or kind of monetary system that we envision, that we integrate climate action directly into the very fabric of our economic system. The term we call it, it's not only us, it's more movement. It's called ReFi, which stands for regenerative finance, which just opens up our minds of how we rethink the monetary system could work or should work in order to prevent the climate crisis. That's it for me, Shrey.
Thank you, Robin. That was wonderful. Some truly innovative work that you're doing with Kumo, and we can now use this time to explore both of your expertise further. So we have a few questions for the panel. First off, Cedric, so how do you see AI impacting the fight against climate change and its larger impacts on society?
Important question. Significant, but should not be overestimated, and it's a general thing. AI is very good about information and very good at playing games, is very good at recognizing patterns, whatever. But at some point, when it gets to climate change, there are physical laws that you cannot go against. And these physical laws translate into issues which are about biology, about things that are incompressible. Take one example. So Robin mentioned the vegan diet. Now, there's no possible plan that's been ever proposed for green transition for the planet without considerable reduction of the meat which is produced and consumed and the cattle that goes with it. And for instance, IDRI has this plan where it's about cutting at least by half the meat production in Europe. It's a hard thing. No artificial intelligence in the world will go around the fact that at some point we as a society have to eat much less meat. And we can go on like this. You can go on with AI. It will not make you go around the fact that we should not drill oil and coal and whatever. So there are the physical ground and so on that you need to be aware of. Second thing, AI, like any technology, has its side of rebound effect, because AI needs matter and it needs energy, etc., etc. And the very large models which currently are in use for ChatGPT and whatever, they use extraordinary amount of memory and energy. So they cannot be generalized without strong effects. Globally, by the way, it's estimated, but typically take any technological response to the climate, generically, about half of it is eaten up by rebound effect, say more consumption or more use of resources or whatever. Third problem with AI, it can serve you, but it can also serve your enemies. And usually your enemies have much more money and means than you have. Fourth problem, behavior change is possible, but requires much more public effort than technology change usually. I'm not saying that technology change is easy. There are many obstacles against technology change. But behavior change is more difficult, and so the society should spend more talk about the behavior change than about the tech change. This leads me to the final point I wanted to make. We all know about greenwashing. Now, at least as important as greenwashing is techwashing. That is when you are a society or a government in charge of a difficult mission and you want to divert people and public opinion from the main thing, which is a low-tech problem, from the high-tech problem, which is just a tiny bit of it, but it will attract attention and funding because it's high-tech. This is very powerful. For instance, our government 1 year ago said something like agriculture of the future is about genome editing and artificial intelligence and robotics. Now, come on. We all know, scientists tell us what agriculture of the future is about. It's about getting rid of pesticides, getting rid of fossil use, of improving the life of peasants, of changing consumption habits, etc. But not about, it cannot make it down to these three things. But because these three things are high-tech, it focuses the attention and diverts the public debate and the funding on these minor high-tech things from these major low-tech stuff.
Thank you, Cedric. Those were some powerful words and a much more realistic and grounded perspective on AI and the potential pitfalls. Now, Robin, well, same question. So, from the perspective of a technical expert on AI, how do you see the potential of this technology or this philosophy at some level? Are we underestimating it? Are we overestimating it? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think we are underestimating ourselves, as Cedric mentioned. It's so many obvious things that we could just do directly. We don't need technology telling us what to do. Maybe we can develop an AI that is smart enough to nudge us there so we maybe stop doing these things. What is AI in general? AI is the idea of using software to compete with humans in terms of our vision, of language recognition, and also being able to speak. And AI is based on 3 different pillars. It's regression, it's analytics, and it's generative. That's the new thing we're all talking about. Regression is just about like finding the thing. Analytics is, of course, analyzing it. What is it about? And generative means, now let's make the new stuff. What's there? Which is very good. We can do many things with it. We are already doing. Medicine is a great example. In climate change, what some ideas or projects that are already being worked on is the concept of a digital twin. And a digital twin is not the visual representation of it like many people think of, that there's maybe a video that is, or a screen that is simulating how the forest grows. It's much more about the data model that's used or being built over years with all the inputs that have been gathered and the observations to then mirror the forest as it is, and then in certain scenarios we can run simulations that help us to better understand how the forest works, what kind of treatment would be needed, or maybe there's a disaster coming that we cannot prevent, which can be very powerful. But also I think many of you have seen deep fake videos, having Joe Biden saying something that he's never said, but the video is very much convincing. And if you don't pay very much attention to it and rethink or question what he's saying, then you believe it. The same can be done with climate data. With generative AI, we can create completely new data sets that seem very promising, and also generative AI can create us the publications that cite this data. And we will get to a point where the main challenge of us in terms of decision-making or interpretation will be, is this something that's been made by humans, or is this something I can trust? Is this something that's completely made up but still makes sense? And because it's easier to believe in this, I decide to just go with the first hit on Google that I find. So I see lots of potential in AI, but also I want to highlight the risk there, and we need to be careful with what we build, because technology is what brought us here in the first place. And technology can be a solution for us to really not surpassing 1.5 target. But with every hype, what I've seen, and I'm 29 years old, so there haven't been so many hypes, but I also tend to joining this. We know the obvious, and we all are like, we could do this, maybe we shouldn't. And then there's like AI coming, the promise into a better future. And it's much easier for us to do more than to do less. And it's much easier for us to invest billions and trillions of dollars into something that just postpones the problem to the next stage. And then in a couple of years, I'm very sure the next thing will come. But we need to make sure that in the meantime, we do some progress, some meaningful progress.
Let me just add to what Robin just said. On the positive side, when it comes to decisions for, say, new equipment in your city, sparing energy, or whatever decision, one of the real obstacles is the time it takes for the decision maker to take the decision. I remember a discussion with some body industrial with a great tool for saving energy, for public lighting, etc., etc. He told me the average time between the moment I get in contact with the council executive, the city council or whatever, and the time when it is implemented is 8 years. That is the time of the decision. Now, AI is a great tool for visualizing things. And in these issues, when you have a way to make things, to make the decider see how it looks like, it can significantly improve the time of decision. Second thing, on the negative side, and to go exactly in the direction that Robin said, we've seen in France, but not only in France, recently a decisive trend toward increase of climato-skepticism, or at least increase of the share of people who believe that this is not a purely human-made thing, the climate stuff, the climate change. It comes exactly at the same time where science comes decisive evidence for the fact that it's 100% human-made. But it comes at the time in which there is renewed vitality of all the stuff in the social networks and so on, some of them coming from disorganized backgrounds, some of them coming from very organized sources, is working out using patterns, using created information to make people doubt. And it's something we have to take very seriously.
Thank you for your insightful comment. And I think we can all learn from the experience of a lawyer who recently made a court filing using ChatGPT. And it turned out there were 6 non-existent laws that had been cited that ChatGPT just came up with. And anyone who spent long enough on that platform, I'm sure has had the same experience. So now I'll ask 2 questions in one to Cedric. So we come to your role as a politician. Now you've been at the SB for a couple of days. How do you see the UNFCCC process and its components, including and beyond the GST, in terms of their effect on political processes and political actors, including political parties, and their legislative impact overall? And since we keep talking about Paris goals and Paris Agreement, what's actually happening in Paris? What is the French response to the global process to tackle climate change, and what disconnects do you see between parties and nations and society?
So first, here I see in SB, I see a smooth and informative process. Lots of occasions for discussion, for meeting, to see information, etc., and rules and procedures which have been improved and so on. I understand they have been worked out and improved over the years and so on. But very few people who are actually on the decision making, I mean, people representing parties are able to convey to political parties here and there in the world a sense of what is going here. Very few people representing local executive bodies like mayors and so on, are people who are able to make the transition. I'm not saying we should mix things, but so that this sphere is informed of what is going on here and really understand the stakes and the language and the basic principles, there has to be some interconnection. And otherwise, it's very painful when there are the decision-making process. I remember when they were in Parliament in France, when it was time for the big, or supposed to be big, laws about climate change and resilience and so on. And they were hearing of key people from IPCC at Parliament. It did not went well. People like Valérie Masson-Delmotte, who's a star in the French science and who was co-chair of the working group 1 of IPCC. During the auditions, she was not treated smoothly by the members of parliament. At some point there was heated argument like, you know, you're a great scientist, but we know also we have a lot of problems and we have to, there is some expectations by our voters and the citizens, etc., etc. And globally, all the recommendations that we had from the science or from the Assembly of Citizens, which there was at some point in Paris, the Convention for Climate, which did a very great result, it was all completely washed down by the whole process when it came to the decision making. Also including a very strong attack by part of the press and media saying these people are not independent citizens, they are activists, they are ideologists, they are, how they say, green khmers, whatever word they used to say. But it was very strong. And so there is need to find how to make the connection better. Now in France, you know, France is so full of paradoxes that it would be enormous to list them all. Among the paradoxes of France is that France has always seen itself as very international and universal and working for mankind, and so proud to be the siege of the Paris Treaty. But then France is very much absent or underrepresented in international circles. I've seen it in tech, I've seen it now in political circles, I've seen it everywhere. When I was working for the European Commission, they told me, how do you reach France? It's the only country we don't manage to reach and have good contact with. Or now that I'm part of the strategic board of the European Forum at Albach in Tyrol, which has been since 1945 the Forum for European Political Construction. And when I arrived, they told me, you know, we have a problem with France. The club of Albach Forum in Paris was shut down because of internal disputes. And France is underrepresented here, even though historically all the thinkers and writers about European identity were French. So how come it's underrepresented? So I've been working with that, trying to do that. One may say, okay, if the French people are so busy arguing between themselves and destroying each other, then so be it. But you cannot do this, because you will not be able to construct Europe without France. And you'll not be able to construct green strategy for the world without Europe. So we need the goddamn French people. It's part of my goal to do this, part of it. I'm doing, as I'm sitting here, I'm preparing already papers and reports to give some of them informally to some parties in France and try to convince them you have to send people here, etc., etc. And that's part of the difficulties. As the politicians seem so busy, but we need them, and it will not be done without them. Entrepreneurs are so busy, but green transition will not be done without the industry and entrepreneurs in general, and we will not be able to do it without the French. That's it.
Well, thank you, Cedric. I'm glad that we have at least one Frenchman on board. There is at least one French person we know. Who's fighting the good fight?
Now there's an official French delegation here, I have to say.
Yes.
It's here, but influential representatives of influential French entrepreneurs, of French NGOs, etc., grossly underrepresented with respect to what it should be.
No, that is absolutely true. So I'll just have one last question for Robin, and then we'll have time for a couple of audience questions. So Robin, early on we talked about challenges in forming connections and partnerships, and you have had some experience with the UNFCCC system as well. So for your work with Kumo, which is an important part of the decarbonization process, I mean, at the end of the day we can come up with all the technologies we want, but it's money that makes the world go round, and for that we look at you. So what are the challenges that you face in scaling as a result of difficulties in cross-border collaboration, and how do you see the UN system and in general the intergovernmental architecture that's trying to deal with climate change? How do you see it helping or lacking in support?
So the challenges we face when it comes to cross-border collaboration is bringing something beyond the pilot stage. It's usually very easy to get different stakeholders agreeing on something which sounds very promising. Everyone is motivated, and we start working. And even if it works, it's like, what's the next step? Because at some point you need to sign agreements or have contracts, money is involved, and not only within your company, but there are transactional payments that need to be worked on. That's something that's preventing us, or also many folks that I know. It's like, we are based in Germany, so Germany and the European Union is in general easy for us, but we provide a solution for mostly the global south. And so we don't have the resources as a startup to go the legal or regulatory process for each country that we want to partner with, or companies from this country. And what I would wish there to be is thinking more of a global framework, because climate change is a global problem. And if we have many different national or local frameworks that are not able to interact with each other, we cannot build shared solutions. And climate change is very complex, so usually it requires more than just one party being involved. And for the UNFCCC, maybe we can have some pilot projects or some neutrality status for some people to try this out. What if maybe the handshake could be enough to get something started, and maybe then do some retro perspective and thinking, okay, how did it work? how many times, 100 times, would we have interfered with the law? But in the end, nothing happened because we didn't harm anyone, but we built a solution that was able to improve something and drive climate action. And then think, okay, how can we standardize this process? I have also an academic background, and usually when applying for funding from the European Union, it's like a huge effort that we need to make to write these proposals. But the European Union, they started a fast-track program as a pilot. So you can have maybe a 10-pager application rather than hundreds of pages. And I would wish for more faith in the people that we will not use the system unethically, and more like seeing it as a chance to learn something new, and also have my full respect for managing 196 countries or parties. That's something we haven't done before. Maybe they're a newer, maybe they're a leaner solution, but maybe more thinking in local hubs or local communities that can try to develop governance systems that control and govern themselves. And I mean, we're all human, and we should mostly rely on this and not too much on how we can put so much regulation on it that we cannot innovate anymore, or focusing on AI and put so much promise into something that we don't really know how to use yet.
Thank you for your remarks, Robin. And yes, we can see that this system has failed to scale efforts by the players who are really working on the ground. So we can discuss all the NDCs and NAPs and so on, but ultimately, how does that actually influence action? We can have countries talking about working together, but when technology transfer is needed, whether it's north-south or south-south, how are those entrepreneurs helped by the efforts taking place here? Not to undermine the value of these efforts, but how does it translate to action at the ground? And there are some relatively simple steps that can be taken to enable technology transfer. So I think we have just enough time for a few questions from the audience, and a couple of housekeeping notes before that. So after the panel, in the next few days, we will be releasing a summary of the discussion and of the Q&As. So you can submit your email address at a form that you can access through this QR code on the screen, and we'll be sharing a brief summary and some more commentary based on our panel today. And secondly, for the Q&A, so it's a question and answer session. So a question is something that should ideally end with a question mark. So you can share comments, but make sure that your last sentence ends with a question mark. And you can direct your questions to a particular panelist or to the panel as a whole. I'll pass on the mic to the gentleman in the back who asked for it earlier, and then we can have the gentleman here. Do you have a microphone there? Oh, wait.
Good. But thank you so much, Mr. Clement, Villanis, and Montana Goyal. I'm Yusuke. I'm from Youth and Geo constituency of the UNCCC, and involved in multiple youth-led conferences, forum, organization. And I tried to make it short, but I wanted to demonstrate my frustration and also hear critics and feedbacks on it. But you, Mr. Villani, you talked about the importance of the collective action, suggesting like this obligatory partnership for tackle like all those global challenges. And I'm also enthusiastic in this idea of collective actions, and that's why we organize conferences and forums. However, we end up always in the previous years in writing recommendation letters that have little possibility of being implemented, and that's why we got very frustrated. And we always this year we were seeking for ways to do more, and in this sense we were trying to understand different approaches, methodologies, structured systems that will enable this inclusive, multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, intergenerational, strong and effective social dialogue towards climate ambition and SDG implementation, like through, I don't know, like think tanks or hackathon, roundtable to bring all together in an equal level, or pre-conferences events, happening to specific target groups and after joining them together, or providing platforms to connect people, so who have money and those young people that have ideas, or consumers and producers. So I just wanted to hear like suggestions or good practices, or even like key points to us to take into consideration, or key dangerous like points to us to be careful. But to all of it to enable to us to have like this fruitful like synergy and collaborative space on those conferences and forums that we are organizing for this year and to the next years. So sorry for the long statement, but thank you so much for your attention.
Yes. I'll be glad to rediscuss this in detail with you just afterwards, but the short answer is, for the young people, you should be ready to make as much noise as possible. That's the only way that politics at large will give some mental space for you in their brain. Think that there's an enormous distortion in the brain of politicians towards aged people, because they know very well that the rate of voters among aged people is much higher than among the youth. They know it. This is one of the advice that they give you. Oh, be careful with your elderly electors. They are the one who elect you or not, etc., etc. So you keep reminding. You have to, as young people, have to keep reminding and reminding again to the political sphere, we do exist, and put the pressure on this. And second, the COVID, one of the terrible effects of the COVID was to cut all the youth movements in a horrible way. And it will take some time before it is back again at the level that it was before. That's one of the terrible effects on society. We have to take this into account and work even harder on this. Then, to start these things and initiatives and so on, I really think you have to find the right person and people who will be ready to really start. Not say, okay, let's people, yes, it's good, or make a speech or make a promise or whatever. The people who will tell you, now, let's do it now. Here's a forum. I give you the keys of my city. You have 3 days to do this. You have a platform. You have some funding, whatever. These people do exist, but you have to go and fetch them. I will be ready to, very happy to help.
Thank you. We have time for one other question, I think. So,
Yeah.
And we'll see if there's more time. But yes. So
Yes.
please go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clement and Mr. Villani. My name is Okotola. I am a lawyer from Uganda, but I'm also heavily politicized. I host a show called Focus on Parliament in Uganda, where I host parliamentarians, and I know the power of politicians. So I was really relating with what you're saying. Also, in the same vein, I do a lot of media work with different media companies in behavior change communication, especially on environment issues. I want to be more direct about Green Spider, because I see it's largely your identity. A lot of your identity now is around that. What is the use case for Green Spider for, let's say, a behavior change media company in Uganda? From the point of getting to know it like now and to actually realizing our dreams, what are some of the catalyzing, and also technically being part of the community and benefiting from it? Yeah, thank you.
We can take another question at the same time.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Thank you both of you for your time. I'm very excited about this topic, and also your transparency. It's very valuable in this space. I have a question about just AI in general. Like, are there any climate demands in your respective fields that you think AI can possibly, positively impact? Have you seen any themes around here in the SBs? I know it's only like day 3, but have you seen any themes that could benefit from these AI technologies, just given that the technology is so new and has a lot of potential? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So I think Cedric can take the question about Green Spider and give a quick response, and then Robin can respond, or perhaps you both can respond to the AI question. So Cedric, on to you.
Yes. So first thing is good projects and connections are made when you know what the subject and the theme. This means first thing would be you and I discussing and talk about the issues in Uganda. Second, in your part of the world, there's been a project which has significantly benefited from international connections, and that is the Stop ECOP initiative. I mean, currently these people, and these are our friends, both to Shrey and I, people fighting against the ECOP criminal project. They are relying on international connections to try to rightly attack the reputation of the project so that the banks can withdraw their support. And for the moment, they've managed to get billions from various commitments from various banks out of the game, and I hope they do get the total project out of it. But this is an example in which the key step is to have the right connections to international motivated people who can start these kind of campaigns.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the second question. Where I see the emergence of AI is, it's data, of course, and everything where we have like massive amounts of data that exceed our capabilities as humans to really validate, evaluate, verify, everything like this. Also, I see the use cases for AI in simulating complex ecological systems. We can try to support ecosystems so they can thrive quicker and become more self-sustaining again, so we don't need to support them. But also it's a good way to simulate and show what's direction we are heading, what are the consequences. Usually we tend to act when it's too late. Maybe I can help showing us that it's too late and we should start now.
Okay, thank you both. So we have finished on the dot. So I'll wrap it up quickly. So yes, we can have further discussions, after the panel. So thank you both of you for joining us. Thank you all of us for being here at this hour. And we hope to thank you, and we hope to continue this conversation outside the room. Thank you.